Ladies and gentlemen, as we are about to start the session, may we ask you to please take your seats. Thank you. Welcome our moderator, Larry Madowo.
I was hoping for a much stronger applause, but I'll take it. You guys are great. You guys are great. I should take you everywhere. Listen, the world is changing, and so is the global economic landscape. And we are going to hear some perspectives from different parts of the world, from Turkey, from Saudi Arabia, from Nigeria. And I'm excited to bring the panelists for this to start the conversation. Please welcome Faisal F. Alibrahim, Minister of Economy and Planning of Saudi Arabia. Thank you. Please welcome to the stage as well Mehmet Şimşek, Minister of Finance from Turkey. Also joining us on the stage is Yusuf Tuggar, Minister of Foreign Affairs from Nigeria. And finally, Elif Bilgi Zapparoli, Head of International Client Strategy at Bank of America. Thank you all so much for joining us here. It's a beautiful place to be having this discussion. I want to start with the different perspectives and views from the parts of the world that you represent, and you're closest to me, Minister Alibrahim, so I will start with you. How you see the world. We were talking about global trade in the last session. You have a very unique perspective from Saudi Arabia about this topic. Go for it.
Sure, thank you very much, Larry. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here. I'd say maybe everybody's been looking at what's happening in the US in terms of potential for a recession or a soft landing or a hard landing. And it's clear that the US economy is going strong, and it's clear that the Fed is responding to data, and there's an impact in terms of how the Fed responds on various economies around the world. So it's bigger than just the US economy story. That's what I think everybody's looking at. We've been looking at China as well, what came out of the third plenum, but also what's been announced in the last few days or week or so in terms
massive
of
stimulus
programs that's trying to help achieve that, I'd say, 5% target. That's important. This either demonstrates agility in policymaking or demonstrates that there is kind of a different view compared to what came out of the third plenum's documents, at least maybe temporarily. So that's something that we're looking at. It seems that over there's a heavy emphasis on innovation, research, development, but as a large organism that operates in a serious way and that's investing in renewable energy for AI, for data centers, et cetera, but not necessarily cultivating the entrepreneurial, I'd say, energy that existed before COVID. So it's something to look at. It's a different model, and we'll see how that impacts growth. Europe, I think we also looked at the Draghi report, and we're seeing how important it is for Europe to remain competitive. That's good for global growth. And of course, the rest of the world. We're looking at everything there. The kingdom is a bigger part of the economy today, more integrated, the global economy today, and it's important. It's important for two reasons. One, it affects demand for energy, and we will continue to be the most reliable source of clean hydrocarbon energy, but very soon a leader in renewable energy. We're very serious about that. But because we want to engage more with the external markets, we want to diversify our economy away from energy and petchem into more products, to diversify our sources of growth, products that are more complex, products that are competitive in external markets, on the goods and services side. And if you look at our transformation so far, you'll see that there's a lot of progress, but the job's not done. There's been an increase in non-oil activities as a percentage of total real GDP to 52% for the first time. And the reliance, direct and indirect, on oil money flow, if you will, has dropped significantly since the start of Vision 2030. And that's just one example. There's more we can say on the social side. There's more we can say on the institutional capability side. So it's very important for us to, keep a view on what's going on in the global economy. We are a member of it, but also we have something to say and something to add to that discussion.
All right, we'll come back to a couple of things there, diversifying the economy, moving away from the reliance on petrochemicals. But Minister Tuggar, Nigeria is also a major oil economy, highly dependent on the oil and gas sector. And President Tinubu just gave an address for Independence Day and asked for patience, because there's people in Nigeria who are a little impatient with the state of things.
Well, President Tinubu came into office end of May last year, embarked on macroeconomic reforms. We started feeling the positive impact of the macroeconomic reforms, narrowing down the numerous exchange rates that we had to one single window, removal of fuel subsidy, and the naira began to stabilize against, harder currency against the dollar. But unfortunately, we had a major setback with the activities of cryptocurrency exchanges that impacted negatively on our exchange rates. We are regrouping. We're coming back from that. There are other reforms in the area of taxation, so we're improving our tax collection, tax regimes. Of course, at the same time, also creating an opportunity for investors, corporate investors, so taxes, there are tax incentives there and tax breaks. We have special economic zones that are attracting a lot of corporate players. We're improving infrastructure. We have a lot of rail projects going on, road projects, and fiber optic cabling. Of course, you know how robust digital space is. There's a lot of growth. We have a very youthful population that are getting access to fast-speed internet. 70% of Nigerians are under the age of 30, so that's quite significant. We're a nation of 220 million people. We're going to be 400 by the year 400 million by the year 2050. So we want to use that to grow our economy. So things are stabilizing, and we envisage a situation where also we bring in more of our informal sector to the formal space, which will drive a lot of growth. Nigeria is a country, it's a huge market. Even before the country came about, it's a country that came about at the confluence of two great African rivers, where every day is a market day somewhere. In every village, every town, people move from one place to the other, and this is how the country came about. So a lot of opportunities there, a lot of opportunities for investment, and we are the main drivers of the African Continental Free Trade Area, because wherever you go on the continent, it's Nigerian banks that you'll see. It's Access Bank, it's Zenith, it's UBA, it's GT Bank, and Nigeria is really the entry point into the African market, and we expect to see more of that.
I want to go back a little bit. Did you say that the main reason why the currency took a big hit was because of cryptocurrency trading?
Following the reforms, yes. It was quite significant. It was a major, major blow. A lot of illicit funds, money laundering was taking place through the crypto exchange.
Nigeria has cracked down quite a bit on this crypto trading, but that has not saved the currency completely.
It's made a rebound, so we're seeing the effects. It takes time, but definitely it's helping.
All right, Minister Şimşek, thank you so much for joining us as well. Inflation fell below 52% for the first time in August, but it's still below what the central bank's target is. What's the view from Turkey?
Thank you, Larry. I'm also delighted to be here today, and guten Morgen, everyone. Well, we live in a rough neighborhood. The war in Ukraine has had a big impact in terms of inflationary dynamics. Of course, some of it was also self-inflicted. We've addressed a number of macroeconomic challenges, and some of them obviously requires more time to deal with. I think a year ago, we were faced with a sizable current account deficit, which has now largely disappeared. We've rebuilt reserves in tune of $90 billion on a net basis, reduced contingent liabilities. Despite the earthquake, massive earthquake, and what it means for spending, we've managed to bring non-earthquake fiscal deficit to 1.6% of GDP, which is quite moderate. And unlike the rest of the world, gross public sector debt to GDP ratio is currently in high 20s, as opposed to much higher in peer countries. So fiscal deficit is under control. Debt dynamics are quite favorable. As I said, we've addressed external vulnerabilities. So that leaves us with one major challenge on the macro side, and that's inflation. Looking at post-1970s experience of disinflation in 56 countries, 100 episodes, it usually takes about 3.4 years to bring inflation back to pre-shock levels. So I don't think Turkish inflation will defy gravity. I think we have a monetary policy that is now strong to anchor inflation expectation, but also to bring inflation down. Going forward, highly likely we will experience a significant negative fiscal impulse, and that's also going to be conducive of bringing inflation down. So more supportive incomes policies, tight monetary and fiscal policies, ultimately inflation gets anchored, and we hope that will bring inflation back down to single digits by the end of 2026, which will be in line with global experience.
All right, so you're giving a conservative timeline here. You don't want to commit to by the end of, say, next year or something like that.
No, we are already in the midst of a major disinflation. So inflation is falling. Mm-hmm. It did peak at mid-70s,
right,
which sounds crazy, but it did. And now it's likely to fall to low 40s this year, high teens next year, and single digits in 2026. Because we want to do it while maintaining decent job growth and, shock therapy, obviously was the alternative. And I don't think that would have generated better results.
Okay, we'll come back to the geopolitical tensions a little later. You mentioned you live in a rough neighborhood. I don't think there's anybody here who would disagree with that. Elif, I want to hear from your view from the other side. You don't work in the public sector, but you have relationships in all these parts of the world. What's the view from Bank of America? Where are you seeing the opportunities in emerging markets?
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank for the opportunity to be here. This is the second year where Bank of America is partnering with ESMT for the Building Global Dialogue, and it's wonderful to see different viewpoints, different participation, so thank you for the opportunity. As Bank of America, we are privileged to have a balance sheet that's in excess of $3 trillion, and we're present in 36 countries, and we have an opportunity to participate in many financings around the world. And maybe I want to talk about a few new trends that really excite us, and those are around sustainability. When you really look at energy investments that took place over the last 2-3 years, as we know, around $3 trillion went into energy investments. And for the first time, the past 1-2 years, more than 60-70% of that went into renewables. So around 1.8 trillion went into that. Of course, we as the private sector and we as an intermediary are very keen to see that number grow and to see how we can facilitate that. Also, when you look at capital markets, there's been more than 1.2 trillion of sustainability-linked bond issuance. We see our role as the bridge between private capital, public sectors. How can we leverage what's available in the market so that we can funnel, invest more? Now, the statistic that I have to add to those big numbers is when you look at the share of less developed world, when you look at the share of emerging markets, it's less than 15%. So even though there is a lot of financing going on, it's mostly around the developed world. So I think the opportunity for us is to do that. And I'm proud to say that we are working with governments like government of Turkey, like with Minister Şimşek, to contribute to their sustainability journey so that we can, again, provide the private sector perspective. What are investors looking for? What is the best way of financing it? And almost turning the sustainability question into a financial question. You know, yesterday in a number of our panels, we discussed this should be an industrial conversation. People are investing in it because there are returns.
That's the thing I was going to ask. Is there a return for it? Is it a feel-good thing that the world says needs to happen?
It can't be because it's a feel-good thing. We have to bring an economic reality, and that's what's happening. And this is where we've got upside in working with governments to have that bridge, because reality is renewables are cost-effective. There is a return. There is certainly a significant consumer demand. Again, we're going to hear from the youth here. Transition is a priority for them. Global warming is a priority for them. So very excited that I belong to a platform that can facilitate some of this.
All right, you mentioned the youth. We will be hearing from the young voices back there in a moment, but the panelists have also agreed to hear from the audience. If you have a question, pay attention. We'll give you a chance to ask them questions directly. Let's make it a real dialogue. And if they have second thoughts or they're having doubts, it's too late now. I announced it, so it's happening. We're going to do this. Minister Alibrahim, it's impossible to ignore the elephant in the room, which is that your region is on the verge of war, especially after the developments yesterday with Iran firing into Israel. You're the guy in charge of economy and planning. How much does it worry you, the possibility of an all-out war in your region?
I agree, it's something very hard to avoid discussing, and it's unfortunate, the escalation that we've seen. But I will generally refer anyone who's interested to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs because they are designated to comment on this. However, looking at the global economy as a whole, looking at our region, it is clear that we are operating below our potential. And operating below your potential is operating at a loss. And I think we can't afford to operate as a global economy or global community at a loss, especially with the advent of many crises and sometimes happening at the same time. The Kingdom's position, of course, is one of de-escalation and of dialogue and of resolving these challenges. Mainly because this is something that's regional and is in proximity to many countries that want to see a more prosperous future. The Kingdom, through Vision 2030, has taken it upon itself to unlock its own potential. We looked at the longer-term view, and we said we cannot continue the way we're doing things as an economy the way we were, and we need to change things. That has helped our own economy, helped us unlock a lot of potential. We're still in the beginning of this journey, and every day feels like day one, but it has also inspired other nations in the region that we are working with, helping technically, not just financially, focusing more on reform to kind of do the same. And we're also learning from all economy sizes. I'd say the other reason is it really puts a dent in our calls for global collaboration. Today, as the world is changing, It's clear that collaboration is more of a must. That's why this venue, the Berlin Global Dialogue, is very important, and other venues as well. It's important to keep that collaboration in mind. Elif talked about it for many reasons. It's important that we are honest and transparent about our views, our perspectives, even if they're different, especially if they're different. And we hope that wisdom will prevail, de-escalation will happen, dialogue will come into place, and more collaboration will be seen globally, but also regionally, for us to address these challenges. I think if you tie it to our topic, there's a difference between global resilience and national resilience. It's not always the same. If we're solving for the global economy and community, we would be doing things completely different. We're solving sometimes for the national resilience story. And I think the thing that will link the two or get them closer is dialogue and serious collaboration.
Okay, and staying on topic, how is friendshoring and de-risking changing supply chains in developing and emerging markets like Saudi Arabia? And I want to know who is benefiting and succeeding in raising their fair share in the value chain?
So I'd say we were in a steady state of globalization or hyper-globalization, 70s up to maybe Brexit. We're in a state of shifts today. Hopefully that will lead to a new steady state of a new kind of globalization. What's happening today, which we really every day are understanding better, and I don't think we're near understanding fully, is a shift in many, I'd say, sources of power, sources of competitive advantage. Part of that is using resilience, whether truly, genuinely, honestly, as a reason, or geopolitics, national security, to kind of shift the way global trade was happening. Today, trade or global trade is being realigned, as some experts say, along geopolitical lines. And if that continues, 13% of global trade will be even more concentrated, and there might be a drop to global GDP by about 7%. I think a lot of countries can benefit from this, but we need to keep in mind that friendshoring, nearshoring needs to be based in some sort of principles that attract capital that's value-adding and long-term and permanent, and that helps really more economic development. Otherwise, if you're going to keep using industrial policy without measure, at some point there will be a race to the bottom, and all I'd say FDI will look the same. It's important for us to attract the right kind of FDI. In the kingdom, for example, we've realized that we can offer proximity to clean energy sources, whether it's hydrocarbon, the cleanest globally, or the cheapest renewable sources, wind and solar, but also access to talent and a young population. We're also a very young population with around 30% below the age of around 29. And also, we have access to carbon removal. We're very serious about having a more inclusive solution suite to climate change that offers access to carbon removal, in addition to many other value propositions that we think are anchored in a long-term story.
All right, speaking of the geopolitical tensions, Minister Şimşek, you sit in an interesting position locationally between East and West. How is Turkey affected in this trade fragmentation, friendshoring, and nearshoring because of where you sit, but also how you see the world and the neighbors around you?
Thank you. Well, nobody is immune to trade fragmentation, clearly. There was a study by the IMF, I think, that said that, if trade fragmentation continue as it is, that it could cost global GDP by up to 7%, which would be equivalent of German and French GDP combined. So clearly, fragmentation, does get in the way. I mean, as you know, trade is one of the engines of global growth, and in recent years, it's been sputtering. When it comes to Turkey, Turkey is a relatively open economy. If you take the volume of goods and services as a percent of GDP, it's well over 50%, possibly close to 60%. So that makes us a sizable open economy, roughly about $1.3 trillion GDP this year estimated. How do we get affected by this? Put aside the recent conflicts, clearly they do. So speaking of more structural trend, we tend to think that we are somewhat more resilient. The reason for that is we have a full customs union with the EU that makes us rule-based, trade with EU. So we are friend in that sense. So as far as friendshoring is concerned, EU through customs union is a friend. And the neighborhood, whether it's Central Asia, Balkans, North Africa, Middle East, we consider ourselves friends. So that's key. As far as nearshoring is concerned, we've benefited from post-pandemic, diversification of supply chains. Because Turkey, in terms of geographic positioning, it looks like we're the center of the earth, but we're very close again to Europe and the immediate neighborhood that is developing pretty fast, including Africa, where we have, obviously not as big as China, we have a strong footprint. So when you look at it from that perspective, we think we'll be resilient to friendshoring, could benefit from that, and also nearshoring. Plus, of course, we have a highly competitive, demographics and workforce. I mean, university graduates annually are north of 900,000. But also we have technical vocational training catering for 400,000. So really, technically speaking, if investors were interested in Turkey, there'll be plenty. And finally, if you look at the last 20 years, despite occasional ups and downs, we've attracted about $270 billion of foreign direct investments, which is quite sizable. So I would argue that right now, of course, it looks negative. I mean, it's weighing down the whole region, the conflicts. But I think longer term, we could somewhat benefit from friendshoring and nearshoring.
All right, and you mentioned Africa. Nigeria is one of Africa's largest economies, sometimes the largest economy. And there's a lot of interest, the Turkish, the Saudis, the Indians, the Russians, obviously Europe and North America. President Biden is going to Angola next week because of that Chinese-US competition there. How do you pick your friends?
Well, we try to get along with everyone. That's why our foreign policy agenda is that it's premised on strategic autonomy, and it's the 4 Ds: democracy, development, demography, and diaspora.
Is it possible to get along with everyone when some of your friends want you not to be friends with other people?
Well, it very much is. Don't forget that Nigeria was one of the key players in the non-aligned movement when we had the Cold War, when we had a bipolar system. Going through, we had what some are now referring to as the unipolar moment. And now we have a multipolar world, clearly. And I don't think we need to pick sides. The same countries, if you notice, that in the G20 feature in BRICS. And right. Nobody has a problem with that, clearly. So I don't see any reason why a country like Nigeria should not be able to pick its friends, because there shouldn't be any difference between the way countries are perceived and the way Nigeria as an African country, as an African leader is perceived. So we continue to engage. We get along with all sides, everybody, and if you notice, Nigeria is a huge country that is surrounded by smaller countries. And over the course of history, you can see clearly that we're non-threatening, which is why a lot of African countries repose confidence and trust in our leadership. Not to talk of a lot of soft power initiatives that Nigeria has been doing silently. Under my ministry, we have what we refer to as the Technical Aid Corps. It's been going on since 1987, where Nigeria is sending out professionals as volunteers paid for by the Nigerian government to African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. So sometimes people wonder when Nigeria is up for a position on the global stage, it has a lot of support rallying around. It's precisely because of these things. And Nigeria, of course, is championing the reform of the global governing bodies, specifically the United Nations Security Council. It's anachronistic. It's a 20th century contraption that is not fit for the 21st century. So it's time to reform. It's time to democratize. Ditto the G20.
And you're leading those efforts to make sure that Africa has a permanent seat in the UN Security Council.
Absolutely.
The US now supports it, but will it happen?
Well, we have to make it happen collectively for the sake of the planet.
Why is it so significant?
It's so significant because very significant decisions are being made in the United Nations Security Council. In particular, if you're talking about Africa, as much as 60% of the decisions made in the UN Security Council have to do with Africa. And yet, there's no African country with a permanent seat there. So that is what we need to change. We need, if we're paying lip service to democracy and participation, then surely we should take into account the global population, the trajectory of its growth, and representation. That's what we're pushing for.
All right, I'm almost ready to take some questions, so we'll get a microphone in the crowd, but I just want to hear from Elif real quick. You talked about sustainability and making sure that it makes business sense. How can banks and financial institutions really help in that journey?
I'll come to that, but beforehand, I'd like to commend Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
And follow up on what Minister Alibrahim has said. Saudi Arabia has really been a bright spot from a private sector capital markets perspective over the last couple of years with the leadership and the vision that they've shown in opening up. We've been in this country for decades, but what we've observed over the last couple of years, I think, is an example for everyone. Because there was a goal, 2030, but it was much more than a goal. Very detailed plan. And when you look at the talent that the kingdom was able to accumulate, both within the public sector, then of course it goes into private sector. Related to your first question, we need examples of this. So in this world of deglobalization, open-minded, keen to partner with the rest of the world. And because of that, we're attracting a lot of investment into Saudi Arabia in things like you normally wouldn't think, like renewables. I think in sustainability finance, to come to the second question of development finance, I think what we need to do, in our opinion, as a bank is we need to do more of blended finance. Because you've got development finance organizations, you've got multilateral development programs, but when you look at their effectiveness, it's minute compared to the financing needs of the developing world. International Energy Agency has a study that shows that roughly less than $60 billion per annum goes from FDIs from the rest of the world. When you really think just for energy transition, we need 4.5 trillion around the world. So it's just so small. So what we need to do is we need to partner better between public institutions. So whether these are governments or multilaterals, with the private sector, because it can't be public sector money alone. There is no such state funds in the world. It needs to be this ability to leverage. And when we look into the details of that, why it's not happening? Because there isn't standardization. You need to be able to have standard guarantees, standard de-risking mechanisms, so that a financing can be taken upon by different actors around the world that are interested in different risk returns. And that needs to be worked on. And in a panel that we had yesterday, we heard that ahead of COP29, there was actually a working group focused on the standardization. How can we come up with instruments so that when Turkey wants to finance something, we're able to create a guarantee mechanism so that the investor that wants AA or AAA can go for that, and other investors can go to the other parts of the curve.
I feel like you and Minister Alibrahim should form a traveling band and go to COP29 and spread this message to everyone. Speak from the rooftops so that the whole world gets it about how to make this financing work, right?
Absolutely.
I'll give you the name of the band later.
Sure.
Okay, can we get a question from the audience real quick? If we can, okay, there's a gentleman here. Can we get a microphone to him? Good man, he's just going to run to you real quick. Introduce yourself, quick question. We'll make it a real dialogue here.
My name is Luku from Electroder, with a battery research development. Thank you very much for sharing our insights. You discussed about this emerging landscapes for opportunities for emerging market. How do you believe this is also emerging opportunities for emerging business, like new business, small and medium sized? And if you believe the value, then how do you expect your policy can support this happen for the smaller companies and startups to survive and thrive in your country, and also, as your clients, your banks? So thank you very much.
You want to take it?
Sure. If I understand properly, maybe I'll just link your question to a global challenge related to productivity. Productivity has been on a decline globally, except for maybe the US recently. And I think we need to really fire on all cylinders here when we want to try to shift productivity in a positive trend and accelerate it. I think there are two groups of countries, a group that is in a better position to catch up with more modern, advanced economies, and a group of countries that isn't. The first group will catch up with advanced economies if the rates continue in 25 years. So it's really a long game, and we need to work. I think collaboration helps, but really focusing on innovation is important in a world where there's a large group of the population that is still young, and technology is shifting fast, and the world is paying attention to institutional capabilities. There are no regrets when you want to, whatever you're doing, continuing to enhance your institutional capabilities is a no-regret move. These three combined, I think, can really make a shift in terms of how we can become more innovative and more driven. There's been a discussion about regulating, etc. I don't think regulation is the issue. I think regulating before innovation crosses the chasm, as the experts say, or over-regulating is the issue. And I think it's important to engage with startups, entrepreneurs, to share the concerns, hear from them before regulations are put in place. I think there's a better way to do this. But in general, we need entrepreneurs, we need SMEs, we need innovation-driven enterprises across the board. They are faster, more agile, and they can give us new entrants to the private sector, but also they can be an added force to an innovation drive that can, adding up years and years of hard work, really make a dent in productivity. The kingdom is shifting from energy and petchems and financial services, where we're most productive, driven mainly by large institutional capabilities, the central bank and the capital market authority, and Aramco and energy, to other areas of growth. Naturally, when you go from where you're more productive, your productivity will decline. So added challenge in our transformation is how do we create engines of growth, but also opportunities for innovation, technology-driven innovation that can make us more productive. I hope that answers.
Oh, thank you. Just to complement what Mr. Alibrahim said, I think SMEs usually are the backbones of any economy, and startups are the components that is the most dynamic. I think access to finance is important, and that requires an ecosystem. I mean, of course, we do have government-run programs that provide support, but the key one is to create a market-based ecosystem to support that, and that's where crowdfunding comes in, that's where business angels comes in, of course, venture capital. So creating a deeper capital market is really key. I mean, that's why US is so successful compared to the rest of the world. So I think that's one key component. The second one is to be open. And here I'm not talking about just trade openness here. I'm referring to being open to talent, because if you look at globally, many of successful startups, the ones that really ultimately have a strong footprint in the long run, are those created by, people who have immigrated, including refugees, of course, which many countries tend to see them as a liability. In fact, they're an asset. So I think if you stay open to talent, to capital, to ideas, and create an ecosystem that is supportive, that is really the best way of sustaining and delivering.
All right, thank you. We have one of the young voices up there ready for the question.
Okay, good morning. Alusa Grace. I'm an EMBA student from Strathmore University in Kenya. And in this conversation, we've talked about nearshoring, we've talked about friendshoring. So with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Nigeria with oil and natural gas, Turkey with their diverse mineral resources, how can they leverage these natural resources to enhance their position in the global value chain? And I think Mr. Faisal talked about industry policies and tariffs. So what strategies can developing countries use to navigate these policies, especially considering the fact that these policies are mainly set by advanced markets? Thank you.
All right, Minister Tuggar, you go first.
Well, we have to get rid of the non-tariff barriers that exist. We keep talking about free trade, yet, you know, the reality is, beginning from Germany, where we are here, you know, this is the land of Mittelstands, medium-sized, family-owned businesses. That's the backbone of a German economy.
He used to be the German ambassador. That's why he knows that. He's the Nigerian ambassador to Germany.
And they're quite keen on investing in Nigeria, in Africa, and other parts of the world. But they need the support. They need, you talked about earlier, blended financing. We need those structures, and we need to get, we need to redefine some of these impediments that have come about, maybe inadvertently. So you have the Lieferketten Gesetz, you know, the supply chain law, which nitpicks on the issue of forced labor or environmentally unacceptable input along the supply chain. Now, you know, it makes one look, you know, closer if you drill down to the issue of, let's say, forced labor. So in Nigeria or Kenya, where you come from, when a 12-year-old kid comes home from school and he helps with the farm work, would that be translated as child labor? Because surely, I'm sure somewhere in Mosul, in the wine-growing region of Germany, let's say, there are kids who also come home during the summer holiday that help with, you know, picking the grapes or something. So these are the sort of things. And then you look at Europe also, the wider picture. You've got deforestation laws. You also have the corporate sustainability law that speaks to these sort of things. So we need to look at that. We need to look at Basel IV regulations that restricts, you know, the funding of businesses, of trade, of investment. And then we have that, because when you talk about nearshoring and friendshoring, in Africa, we're friends to Europe and the rest of the world, and we're also near, you know. We've been, if you look at the actual origin of or the meaning of Mediterranean Sea, it's water in the middle of land, in Latin. So we are neighbors, and, you know, we can take advantage of, you know, the opportunities that exist with each other.
Just before I leave this topic, how come in Africa, African countries don't trade enough with each other? There's only, inter-African trade is only 3% compared to inter-European trade, which is maybe in the 70s.
I'm not going to use the excuse of colonialism and so many other things. Let's talk about now. We need to sit up and get things straight and trade more with each other, the same way other continents do, which is why we have the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's work in progress, but this is what we hope to do. And we also have countries that have come up with solutions that are applicable. So Nigeria, one of the major advantages Nigeria has in terms of the growth that you see in fintech, in media and entertainment, has to do with an investment made as far back as 1994, the Nigeria Interbank Settlement System, which is being borrowed by the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is going to be the Pan-African payment system. So real-time payment makes things move very fast, youthful population, sky's the limit.
All right. I want to hear views from here, but I'll get a question from back here, so you're behind me. We'll get a mic to you. After you jump in real quick, she had a question that also
Sure.
related to you.
So I'd say the way we're looking at it is, industrial policy or any of these tools, anchoring them in a long-term value proposition that the kingdom can provide. Capital is cowardly. That's a saying we have, and apparently it's also in English. But not all capital is the same. And you want to target capital that is of high quality, that is long-term, permanent, value-adding to the economy. Naturally, I think with this shift that we talked about, this stage or phase we're in, naturally some developing countries will be left further behind. But if we go back to adopting the long view or the longer view, if we go back to keeping dialogue open, and if we go back to building institutional capabilities, there's nothing that says any developing country can't all of a sudden develop an edge over some advanced economies or, let's say, competing mid-tier economies and provide something that's useful in this I'd say, phase that ultimately will end and will be in a new, different form of a geoeconomic order that has globalization has helped get us a lot out of poverty, has helped innovation, has helped cost efficiency, has helped resilience. If you think about it, we're going to end up there at some point. So I think keeping in mind on what will give you long-term value, but attract high-quality capital. But in the medium term, let's not dismiss the importance of these three things: a longer view, keeping collaboration and dialogue open, and continuing to invest in institutional capabilities. And of course, the world needs to come together still on the Sustainable Development Agenda. We still have some time. It's not going to end. The deadline is not 2030. This is something that will continue. We need to continue thinking pragmatically with a focused view about solving some of these problems that can unlock, I'd say, better performance against other goals or challenges globally moving forward. And we've been, maybe Nigeria's been talking about reforming some of these multilateral platforms. The kingdom's been engaged in this as well. But specifically on this, we recently been talking to several of the platforms to see how we can have, alongside the Sustainable Development Agenda up to 2030, a focus on some key issues that can be addressed, or more of which can be addressed by 2030.
And globalization has had a lot of successes around the world, but it's not worked for everyone. There's people who've been left behind, who remain in extreme poverty, even though some people have gotten quite wealthy. And I think what we're talking about has to make sure that everybody's comes along. All right. Did we get a microphone to you? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Riham Al-Kusa from Reuters. My question is for Mr. Alibrahim. I want to know how this latest escalation with yesterday's attack is affecting Saudi 2030 vision, and what is Saudi Arabia doing right now to help de-escalate?
The journalists will try. You got to give her credit.
Sure. So
I feel we got to stick together. Us journalists got to stick together.
I respect and appreciate that. I think we need journalism, and we need professional journalism always. But my answer to that, on top of what we said earlier, the kingdom is addressing these geopolitical, regional challenges in two ways. One, it's firing up all cylinders in terms of its diplomatic engine with its partners from all around the world to try to bring all, I'd say, forces or entities or parties into a global dialogue with a meaningful, constructive path to that continued dialogue, and for it to be practical. And you can look at what the kingdom is doing with several coalitions, the most recently one that was announced in the UN, to try to bring about a resolution to this challenge. But two, and this is more related to my focus and some of the other colleagues of mine, is continue on this path to achieve Vision 2030. As Elif said, and I thank you for your words, but this is more than just a transformation plan. This is unlocking potential that has the impact to set an example for many countries that we have learned from in the past, but we can contribute to in the future. I'll add to that. We're not just passive about this. We believe that there should be a view of what the geo-economic order should look like. And our view with our partners should play into what we want to do even beyond 2030. One example is our approach with our African nations and neighbors. The approach shifted from focusing only on security and political coordination and ODA to more impactful ODA, to more trade, more investments, but also equally important, more technical and policy collaboration and assistance. Both ways, by the way. There's many countries that we can learn from and many countries that we can contribute to. That's something very serious to us. We're a young population. Africa is a very young population. We're not going to be young for long. And if we don't get productivity to catch up with the pace at which age or the societies age, we'll be stuck in more challenges and stuck in a place where your capital is committed to address non-productive, non-functioning components of the economy and society rather than amplifying productivity and growth potential.
Is that why you hosted the Saudi Africa Summit last November?
Absolutely.
Will there be another one?
Yes, for sure.
When?
Still not announced. There's been some discussions, but the plan is to host it as frequently as meaningfully as necessary.
Okay, I want to ask Minister Tuggar again which friends he likes, because he wants to get along with everyone. So instead, I'll ask Mr. Şimşek about the problem of high debt, limited access to capital, and how Turkey is thinking about this when you're competing for FDI with pretty much everyone.
Well, first of all, we don't suffer from high debt. If you take the entire indebtedness, including private sector debt, household debt, corporate, government debt, global debt to GDP ratio, I think it was about 330%, if I'm not mistaken. Emerging markets were roughly about 250%. In the case of Turkey, it's about 99%. So we're not a highly leveraged economy. Debt is not a speed limit to growth. So on that basis, we have a strong advantage. I think what's holding global growth back is a combination of low productivity, but also trade fragmentation. It's clearly global indebtedness and demographics that is no longer favorable, except maybe Africa. That's where still demographic is extremely favorable. So when it comes to Turkey, why would somebody consider investing in Turkey? Well, first of all, it's a sizable economy. Including Syrian refugees, we've got about 90 million population, roughly speaking, and a per capita GDP of about $15,000, $1.3 trillion. So this is a sizable economy, but is it growing fast? It is, yes. If you take 100 years, real GDP growth rate is about 4.8%.
Is it growing fast enough for you? I've read some coverage that says maybe growth is slowing. I know you have a medium-term plan for that.
That's a very short-term trade-off between, addressing imbalances, including obviously disinflation. But in the long run, there are no trade-offs. I think we've proven strong growth track record. I mean, if you look at last 20 years, real GDP growth rate has averaged to about 5.5%. So it's a sizable economy. It is growing fast. We've invested about $300 billion in infrastructure over the past 2 decades. So there's a pretty decent infrastructure. There is talent. So I think there's plenty to go for. Market size, growth, and good infrastructure, including AI preparedness and preparedness for frontier technologies. But, geopolitics, does it drag you down? Yes, it certainly is the case. But I think resilience is key. So that's why we have a medium-term program, a new team, a new program to enhance resilience, reduce vulnerabilities.
All right, I want to take one more from the young voices. We have one of them coming up there real quick. But Elif, I want you to get some comments in here about what we're talking about and the concerns you're hearing from the crowd about, whether it's startups, financing, FDI, all of that.
Regarding the question around how to finance startups and maybe smaller companies, I think there are 2 points that Minister Şimşek has made, which I think answers it, which is One, you need a deep capital market because this is a question of leveraging financing. No single bank or group of banks will have enough of a balance sheet to be able to finance growth. So the question is there depth in capital markets so that you can really leverage not just a few institutional balance sheets, but effectively the balance sheet of the citizens, right? And I think, in the world, US is really the only example with that growth and with that depth. And I think with that depth comes the ecosystem that, again, Minister Şimşek talked about. You need an ecosystem that has the appetite to be able to have long-term perspective, high-quality capital, as the minister has mentioned, but not many countries have it. So when you look at where venture capital is, it's very much centered mostly around the US. I think that's an area maybe to ponder on.
I have a comment on this specific. I think every region has its own challenge with entrepreneurship. I think in Europe, it could be regulation. In maybe China today is the ability to believe that anyone can come in and start something and grow and benefit economically without limits, so to say. In the kingdom, I think it's been more on the cultural side, despite it transforming massively in the last 10 years. Today, public sector job, private sector job, startups and entrepreneurship are equally attractive and equally acceptable by society. It wasn't the case 10 years ago. And I think the only place that has it, as Elif said, I think very clear, is the US. And not all cities in the US look at it the same way. In the kingdom, we don't have a huge funding problem when it comes to venture capital and entrepreneurship. What we have a challenge with is this cultural thing that this can grow indefinitely. But two, I think some policymakers and some of my colleagues, and maybe even myself, we can't necessarily always imagine what the new private sector will look like with a bigger role for entrepreneurs and startups in creating SMEs or large cap companies, but also a bigger role for SMEs like Mittelstand in, for example, Germany. So I think part of it is also something that takes time, something that has to do with the culture, with understanding the full potential, full value of this value or value-adding force in the economy.
We only have a minute left, so we can only take 30 seconds of closing comments. What do you want to leave these people with, a takeaway?
Well, real quick, just adding on to what has been said, there's also the issue of credit rating, particularly with developing countries, with African countries, and the general issues surrounding risk, which sometimes is over-exaggerated.
You're talking about the Africa risk premium.
Yes, political risk, financial risk. These are things that need to be unpacked to be properly understood, and then come up with the requisite mitigation strategies. Then there's also the issue of migration, which is the elephant in the room. We talk about removing trade barriers, protectionism, and all of that. The father of modern economics, of free market, Adam Smith, made it clear that for the free market to succeed, there has to also be free movement of people, of labor. Now, this is where, I'm not saying that or every country should open up its borders. It would be unfair for those that have not contributed to social welfare systems to come and become a burden. But there's a demand and a supply. A country like Nigeria, Africa, has a youthful population. We have a lot of skilled workers that are prepared to go to other places to work. And you can see that the northern part of the planet has this challenge of aging populations. So, it's give and take. We need to come up with the structured solutions to address that problem.
I feel like you've opened an entirely new discussion that we just do not have time for. Minister Şimşek, your closing words.
Well, we are a large convergence story. And we have a comprehensive reform program that will help boost competitiveness, productivity, and the potential growth. And we are open to business, and we're open to dialogue. And of course, we would like to re-engage with not only the region, but with our European friends.
All right, Elif, you have the final word.
We believe there is plenty to do. Yes, there are headwinds, but they have always been headwinds, and there will always be headwinds. But the world grew, economies grew. So we believe there's a lot to do, and we believe it starts with communication and collaboration, as discussed, and we're grateful that we can hopefully participate in that.
Minister Alibrahim, why Saudi?
Why Saudi? I think Saudi is a long-term reliable partner, but I want to add, if we get out of this convening with a commitment to maintain a long-term view, a big picture view continuously, keep the collaboration going, keep investing in our institutional capabilities, technology, and people, I think we will always be ready to address any challenges. Optimism is sometimes a choice.
It's good to end on an optimistic note. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Please give them a big round of applause. They've been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next session here will be at 12 o'clock, 12 noon. It's a spotlight interview in cooperation with Deutsche Welle Conflict Zone.